Welcome everyone to this penultimate session of the annual learning event this year. I say penultimate because coming up immediately after this event is our plenary session where we will be talking about climate change with lots of exciting speakers such as Wangari Maathai and Bill Gates and many others. But before that session, I'm very pleased to introduce you to our session capturing what has been a very eventful year and 2 years almost for Agrifin with emergency response with many partners who have responded to the dual threats of COVID-19 and desert locusts. In early 2020, obviously we experienced the global pandemic, but also in East Africa, a historic desert locust invasion across many countries in our portfolio. And what we saw during that process was the power of digital tools to quickly respond to complex emergencies to help inform farmers about what these crises are and how they can help manage the response. We looked at, with our partners, many different channels to support farmers across SMS, TV, radio, WhatsApp, IVR, and all kinds of other innovations in between. We have many learnings to share and to help us capture what has happened over the last year with COVID-19 and the impacts for smallholder farmers. We have Katie Rehberg from 60 Decibels who present the overlying issues that COVID-19 has caused. And then we'll follow up with that with Louis Graham from Busara, who did a specific research project on the response of many of our partners and their effectiveness in tackling behavior change needs of farmers during the emergency. And then we'll go into a panel conversation with a number of our partners who will be introduced to you a bit later, who helped reach 16 million smallholder farmers with digital information and services within the space of months. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Katie Rehberg from 60 Decibels, who will present for the next 10 minutes, followed by Louis at Busara. Over to you, Katie.
My name is Katie Rehberg. As John said, I am a manager at 60 Decibels, and for the past nearly a year, since last June, have been leading our research on the effects of COVID-19 on Kenyan smallholder farmers. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly with all of you and present those results. So get here, excuse the setup. Great. So like I said, since last June, we have been speaking monthly with Kenyan smallholder farmers. And this work has been generously funded by FCDO, formerly DFID's SEMA program, as well as Agrifin Accelerate. Monthly, we've been speaking to 500 farmers about the effects of COVID-19 on both their household financial situation, so their financial well-being, as well as their ability to conduct farming activities, right? Act normally, and their confidence in their ability to actually carry out what they need to do on their farm. As you can see here, we've tried to focus on those smallholder farmers. So everyone we've spoken to has less than 3 acres of land. We aimed for a 50-50 gender split. We know that oftentimes female farmers are underrepresented in this data, and that was something that was really important to us. And we also made sure that these individuals, these farmers, were relying on their farm for either income, food, or both. So we didn't leave anyone out here if they weren't income generating on their farm or just for food, but we wanted to make sure that agriculture, farming, or livestock was an important source of either financial or well-being resources for their household. Important to note here that within our sample, 80% of the farmers we've spoken to have earned income from selling farm produce in the last 12 months, and 55% have earned income from their livestock, so either selling livestock or from goods produced from their livestock. Great, so I'm going to spend some time today just going over, like John said, kind of our overall trends that we're seeing across the pandemic. And it's really interesting to see the different kind of evolution of impact of the pandemic based on different factors like government response, peaks in terms of high levels of infection rates within COVID-19, and just also how that compounds with the seasonality of the normal kind of long and short rain seasons, and how the seasonal effects are also compounding the effects of the pandemic. So the four kind of overall trends that I'm going to focus on today are the financial strife that farmers are facing, the market instability that the lockdown and travel restrictions have caused, some positives in terms of normalcy and what we're seeing kind of as we jump into the recovery phase, hopefully, of this pandemic, and then also looking at kind of gaps in affordability of those digital tools that John mentioned at the beginning. So financial strife we're seeing remains high throughout the pandemic. 8 in 10 farmers have said that their financial well-being has worsened since the beginning of this pandemic. There is some positive news, as you can see on this chart. The severity of this financial worsening has improved over time. So that red line is that farmers saying their financial situation got much worse. And you can see that this peaked in September, and that was right around when travel restrictions across Kenya were at their height, right? They had been in place for a long time and were at their peak. Once those travel restrictions were eased, the severity of that financial worsening, of that kind of severe financial strife, started to normalize and even out. And we're seeing now that more and more farmers are mentioning kind of a slightly worsened financial state rather than kind of that much worse or much more severe financial worsening. Financial worsening is also compounded by a number of factors that we're seeing causing this. So I know I was just on a call yesterday where someone said, what even is financial well-being? And I think financial well-being, as we like to think about it, is really kind of an index, an aggregate measure of how someone feels about their financial situation. And that can be impacted by a number of different, financial levers in someone's life. And so what we're seeing causing this, we're seeing a quarter of farmers have lost at least one income source. That has decreased slightly over time. However, it still remains right around a quarter. Most of those income sources that farmers are losing are from regular or casual labor jobs. So kind of your income, a regular steady source of income. Early on, we saw business enterprises being severely affected. So farmers that maybe had a duka or a small shop having to shut that down and not receiving that income. However, kind of that loss of those business enterprise income sources have started to return as lockdown measures have eased. We're also seeing that market access for farmers has been severely impacted. Early on travel restrictions, farmers were unable to sell their crops, right? They were unable to travel to market because of lockdown restrictions, and also because of the kind of cross-county travel restrictions. Some of their bigger buyers from Nairobi or from city centers were unable to travel to them to buy their goods. And so what that meant is they both lost market access, but they also lost access to maybe those higher price point buyers that they relied on to make that income. We're starting to see this stabilize, or we have seen this stabilize, like I said, as restrictions have eased. However, we think that some of this financial strife might peak again now that the travel restrictions on Nairobi and the surrounding counties have been in place. So along with financial strife, what we're seeing is a high reliance on financial coping mechanisms. So over time, farmers' reliance on numerous financial coping mechanisms have increased. Overall, right now, we're seeing 62% of farmers have relied on 2 or more financial coping mechanisms. And the financial coping mechanism is anything from savings, from borrowing, from having to sell an asset, take a loan, rely on cash or money from transfers from family. So in the question, we have a long list of financial coping mechanisms that farmers can select from. But like I said, 60% have relied on 2 or more. Positive note here, you can see the green line is farmers' reliance on savings, and farmers' reliance on savings has actually increased over time. So this is a positive note, right? It's great to see farmers having some sort of cash reserves to cope with this financial shock. However, this high reliance on savings does lead to some concern that they are depleting their resources and will be unable to, deal with another shock, whether that's another peak in the COVID-19 pandemic or a seasonal climate shock that may happen, right? Like we saw floods and locusts kind of compounding the issues of COVID-19. Over time, we've also seen an increase in that red line, which is borrowing, and that yellow line of having to sell assets. We consider these two coping mechanisms to be severe or dire coping mechanisms, as they often, lead to future limitations on someone's income, right? These are all kind of, an asset might kind of decrease someone's productivity on their farm if it's a farming asset, and borrowing is ultimately a future financial liability that someone's going to have to pay off. So these we consider dire, and although they're helping in the moment with farmers' kind of financial situation, they lead us to be concerned about that future ability to cope financially. So another thing I talked about was this market access. And what we're seeing is farmers are being kind of constrained or squeezed on both the demand and supply side of these market constraints. Nearly half of farmers have had to reduce the amount of crop or livestock that they've produced in order to cope. And we asked a question to understand if that was on purpose or if that was kind of because of the limitations of COVID-19. And what we found is that, as you can see in this wheel chart on the left, over 80% of farmers would like to sell more, but are unable to. And for most, they're unable to because of that market access. So because they couldn't travel to the market or they couldn't find buyers. And now what we're finding is it's not necessarily about accessing in terms of traveling to market, but now it's more about buyers really being unable to pay for prices, right? Being unable to, the financial kind of impact of COVID throughout the supply chain. We are starting to see, though, a rise in farmers holding on to their crops in order to feed their family. So in March, we saw 20% of farmers actively choosing to sell less of their produce in order to feed their family. And we'll talk about that in a second, but that is really, I think, a sign that farmers are, an effect of that financial strife worsening, right? Like farmers are unable to pay the higher prices for food, are constrained in terms of household income, and so having to rely on their crop productivity, which again, potentially leads to concern for that future earning potential. We're also seeing not just market access being constrained, but also the prices farmers receiving are decreasing. So you can see this chart here. Over time, farmers are reporting a severe kind of decrease in the prices that they're receiving. These peaked in October, right around when kind of the market was severely crashing because of those travel restrictions. This has started to normalize, and we're seeing, similar to that financial worsening, the severity of these price decreases starting to normalize. So we're hoping that kind of the market is bouncing back and farmers are going to start receiving kind of back to those normal prices that they would have expected to receive for their crops. On the supply side, farmers are facing higher prices for food, like I just mentioned, but also much higher prices for inputs. Actually, one of our peers, Precision Agriculture, did a really interesting research study and found that agro dealers, when they have to pay for when agro dealers are faced with higher input costs, they're more likely to pass these on to the farmers, right? Increase input costs down to the farmers. And so what we saw here is ports being closed, access to inputs across the supply chain being severely constrained. Those prices for delivery, for transit, all increased and skyrocketed, and those prices were passed down to farmers. And so this meant that farmers were unable to pay for those inputs, and also were unable to, then use them on their crop. So we see that might impact productivity down the line. Interestingly, you can see on the chart on the right, there's a pretty even split between reasons for someone purchasing fewer inputs. Early on, it was because prices were too high, like I just mentioned. So peak prices of inputs were very high. Farmers couldn't afford them. Now what we're starting to see in these more recent months is farmers' lack of finances limiting their ability. So prices are starting to normalize, but farmers themselves lack the financial resources because of having to cope with the initial shock. I know I'm also running out of time and want to pass this on, so I'm going to go quickly through these next couple of slides. A positive note, I don't want to, harp on all the negatives, but normalcy is starting to return. This graph on the left shows reductions in key activities on the farm. And as you can see, farmers are starting to get back to normal to what they would expect to do on their farm. One thing that was great that we saw is that farmers are starting to hire labor back to their farm, which was initially shut down. And that's important for the circular economy, right? Giving jobs, providing jobs to other casual laborers and helping kind of the economy surrounding agriculture. We're also starting to see farmers selling more, or not more, but getting back to normal in the amounts they're selling, what they're purchasing, and also what they're harvesting. So we're hoping this is a sign that normalcy will start to return. Interestingly, as COVID-19 is kind of continuing, we're actually seeing agriculture becoming more important in the eyes of farmers. So over 60% of farmers say agriculture has become more important in their life. And the most kind of severe, most interesting growth in that is farming has become more important as a source of food for farmers. We think that is farmers that traditionally had relied on their farm for just kind of income generation, agro business, are now relying on their farm for food and to feed their families, given the financial constraints of the pandemic. So getting quickly to digital, we also asked farmers about the usage of digital methods throughout the pandemic to really try and understand if their behaviors are changing in the pandemic. And what we found is a pretty interesting split. About 37% of farmers have increased their usage of digital tools, while 37% have remained the same, and actually 17% have decreased their use. What we're finding is the top increases, kind of what folks are using digital or for communication, right? Connecting with people, which I think we all did in the pandemic. But what we're finding is that those increases tend to be in those lower cost digital methods. So radio, SMS, phone calls, and tend to not be around things like, and the decreases tend to be around Facebook, WhatsApp, things that might require internet or higher cost bundles on folks' phones. We have seen nearly everyone that has increased usage using some sort of digital financial service. So that could be sending money with M-Pesa, taking a loan, or also doing agribusiness. The decreases, kind of the barriers to digital use we're finding are lack of funds, so kind of expensiveness of bundles, and also lack of device. So a key takeaway here is while there is huge potential for these digital services, there are still barriers in terms of cost and access. And so figuring out ways to use those lower cost tools to incentivize farmers to use these as coping mechanisms, I think is really important to get these in the hands of farmers. Lastly, what do farmers need to cope with the pandemic and what are they asking for? As you can see on that top line, cash is king. And we know in our research, farmers are often seek kind of financial help and cash. But what we're seeing in Kenya especially is the impact of cash transfers, right? Unconditional or conditional cash transfers. And research by IPA has shown that throughout the pandemic, those cash transfers have been critical to helping Kenyan households kind of survive and cope throughout the pandemic. And so thinking through ways to incentivize these cash transfers or liquidity, whether it's through low cost loans, is going to be really important to help farmers continue to kind of financially bounce back as a household, but also continue the productivity on their farm. Farmers are also seeking low cost access to inputs. So if there's anyone on here that is in the business of kind of giving these high quality, low cost inputs, seeds, fertilizers, trainings to farmers, those are in desperate need. And I think figuring out ways to get those in the hands of farmers at a low cost and pretty efficient way is going to be key. And then lastly, farmers are looking for help to get their businesses, their enterprises back on their feet. So again, kind of liquidity and cash helps there, but also figuring out ways on a macro level to help policymakers kind of figure out how we can get the economy back in shape in Kenya is going to be crucial to farmers. All right, I'm going to pause there and then pass it over to Louis.
Thanks so much, Katie. A lot to unpack there. I forgot to mention to everyone that you can ask questions on the public chat on our platform. Katie, I see there's some questions for you. If you wanted to respond publicly on chat, that would be a great way of doing that. We all knew that COVID and Locust threats were going to impact farmers in some way, but we didn't know how. And I think, Katie, you just put some real evidence behind that. Great work. Louis, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, John. Let me share my screen. I've got a quick presentation. So let me present as well. Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. So my name's Louis Graham. I'm an engagement director at the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics in Nairobi. And today I'm running through a quick presentation on some work that we did with Agrifin through 2020. And this work was focused on evaluating the impact of Agrifin's COVID-19 and Locust response programming. So really, we were brought in as a learning partner to assess how useful is this program for farmers and how much is it really changing knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. So a very quick background to this program, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit more later. So Agrifin developed a response portfolio to both desert locust and COVID-19 crisis, which hit at similar times. There were 4 main partners that we worked with under this. So we really looked at 4 different case studies, each of which delivered information to farmers to try and improve their knowledge of COVID-19 and to try and impact upon their behaviors and their attitudes, and in general, improve the way that people were able to deal with these crises. The first 2 were both in Kenya. One, which was delivered by Ashamba and Media E, was based on SMS and TV, including through the Shamba Shape Up program. The second, which was delivered by We Farm and Producers Direct, was a combination of SMS and in-person based information. Vmware in Nigeria delivered IVR-based information through their 321 line. And in Ethiopia, ATA, the Agricultural Transformation Agency, ran a whole combination of interventions through IVR, radio, and agents. These are all really seeking to improve people's response to COVID-19 and locusts. So we worked with Agrifin to assess the impact of these on farmers on the ground and on the people that were receiving this information. We worked in Kenya, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. We were lucky to be able to access a lot of really good data for this, including data provided by the partners on the kind of questions that they were getting, and then also surveys and qualitative interviews that we went out and did as well. I can only scratch the surface of the results that we got in this presentation, and I think there's a lot more in the presentation that's linked to this. But to scratch the surface, I think there's 3 learnings from this that I want to present today. So the first one, which is a really important and good one to know, is that this information was effective. It did drive improvements in knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors to COVID-19. And it did so especially for people that were starting at quite a low basis. So people who had low baseline information, their attitudes were kind of in the wrong direction and they weren't using the right behaviors. The second learning is that, and I think this came out in 60 Decibel's presentation as well, farmers were equally concerned about livelihoods as well as the disease itself. And in fact, there's evidence they may be more concerned about livelihoods. And then the third learning is that SMSs remained the approach that was most impactful, and also the approach that people said was their preferred, their most trusted method for receiving information remotely. So I'm going to run through kind of how we got to these learnings one by one. So for the first one, around the information being effective, we looked at knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors as outcomes. So we tried to see how did these interventions shift these. So we created a measure which was based on these. So knowledge, we were looking at things like, did people know about appropriate physical distancing? Did they know about transmission mechanisms? For attitude, it was saying, do they believe shaking hands is important? Are they in favor of the new regulations? Are they against them? And behavior was things like, are people keeping distance? Are they wearing masks? Are they washing hands, etc. And so to highlight these results, we started off by running a survey with farmers before this information was given. So we ran this in July 2020 before the partners started to provide this information. And these are results from just one of the case studies here, which was the SMS and in-person combination in Kenya. But what we did is, looking at baseline, we broke down people into those who had quite low knowledge, attitudes, and behavior, those who had decent, and then those who were kind of doing everything right at the start. We then went back a few months later in September, so a good amount of time after these interventions, after this information was given, and explored what were the changes, like what were the changes over time. And as you can see in this graph, there was a quite positive movement. So people who at the start had poor knowledge, attitudes, and behavior, a lot of them, over half, shifted into having really good knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, close to the best it could be. And the same for medium. We didn't see too much dropping off, and we didn't see too much of people staying at the same level. So this is really good evidence there was a strong impact of this program. This is just one case study. If we look at some of the others, and in particular IVR, the effects were a little bit weaker. We still saw improvements for people who had the lowest baseline, but for people in other segments, it was a little bit more static, but certainly still evidence of a good impact. Of course, one question that immediately jumps out here is would these changes have happened anyway without this information being provided? To explore this, we also looked at a control group of farmers. So these were a very comparable group, similar farmers, similar crops, etc., but who weren't receiving communications under Agrifin's crisis portfolio. And we explored how did their knowledge change, their attitude change, and their behavior change over this time. And this graph here in gray is the changes in the control group, and in blue is the changes in the treatment. And what you can see is whilst there were changes and there were improvements, even for people who didn't receive this information, they were a lot smaller and insignificantly, so they were significantly smaller than those who received this information. So in knowledge, for example, we saw an 11-12 percentage point increase in people's knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors compared to only 5% in control. So that's a good 6 or 7% that's on top of what we would have seen anyway. So it's very compelling evidence that there was something, some real impact here. And then the third way we looked at this as well was simply to ask farmers, how useful has this information been for you? So this graph is looking at knowledge. So to what extent farmers said that this information increased their knowledge of COVID-19. And we see almost everybody saying strongly agree or agree. Perhaps a little bit less for IVR, which is the bottom of the three. But still, a good 70-80% saying that they strongly agreed that this was impactful. Not enough time to take you through all of the results, but we saw very similar patterns for people saying it improved their attitudes and improved their behaviors too. Jumping on to the next finding, which was around what people were most concerned about. We were able to access data, incoming data from our partners. So SMSs that had been sent to the information providers from the farmers directly. And so these SMSs gave us a really good glimpse into what are people concerned about, because it's what they're actively going out and asking for information and for support on. We used some very basic, NLP kind of machine learning approaches to categorize the SMSs that were coming in. And we found the dominant category throughout the whole period. So both in May and June, so pre-information, in July and August, post-information, it was really impact on livelihood that was the dominant category that people were concerned about. There were some questions, particularly in the beginning, around what is COVID-19, what's happening in Kenya with it. In July and August, there were questions around how do I prevent it, how does it spread? But still, the biggest category was impact on livelihoods, really jumped out. Breaking this down a little bit further, we looked at what people were actually asking for in this impact on livelihoods. And the biggest category was financial assistance. So there was a demand for financial assistance. And this obviously is something that you would expect from the results we just saw from 60 decibels, that people were they did struggle financially through this period and to an extent still are. And so there were requests, like you can see the quotes on the right here, asking for loans, asking for $150 to start a poultry farming business to continue through this. The second biggest group of questions under impact on livelihoods was how to maintain access to markets. There were a lot of concerns through this about how can I continue to sell my produce whilst COVID-19 is stopping movement and making it harder to reach buyers. And so I think it's important to remember that whilst farmers were concerned about the health impacts, they were also concerned about how do they keep their businesses going through this. And then finally, moving on to the third finding around SMSs being the most popular and maybe the most appropriate channels at this point. We asked farmers simply, what channel do you prefer to receive information from? And here we gave them a whole host of different channels that they could choose, from TV to friends, family, to SMS notifications. And for all of the farmers we looked at, so farmers with each of the different providers, SMS really did dominate. With the IVR provider, there was a little bit less and more of a preference for IVR, but still SMS has remained the channel that people self-identified as where they would prefer to receive information through. Digging into this a little, and we dug into it more in the report, there was a real preference for this because of trust. So if we asked them directly, why do you prefer SMS? And the dominant answer was that they trust it more than other sources, that they worry about misinformation through other channels, and that SMSs for years has been a learning tool which they've come to terms with and they admire. They also valued not having to use the internet for this as well. Several people raised that as an important issue. So I think, we scratched the surface of what there was to find out from this program, but I think we did find some really interesting findings. I think there's lots more to look at as we move forwards. It would be really interesting to look through what's holding back trust in these alternative channels. Why do people not trust WhatsApp as much? I didn't have time to discuss this today, but we did see some evidence of behaviors, in particular, slipping back after the information stopped being given. So people reverting back to poorer behaviors. So it'd be interesting to explore, well, how do we have interventions that provide a longer term change? And then finally, around access to market. So how can we maintain access to market to support livelihoods during crises? So I think that's my 10 minutes up. So I'll stop here and pass it back to John.
Thank you so much, Louis. Excellent work. Just a reminder to everyone, if you want to access those reports, they are publicly available on the Mercy Corps Agrifin website, and I believe those links have been shared on the event portal. So please do access them there. And keep your questions coming. We're going to enter into a quick session with the various innovators in this space who've worked on this response. I think the Busara research really points towards some really interesting learnings around trusted digital channels, but also bundling of information services. One of the learnings that I had on this whole process of response for farmers was there was no right or wrong digital channel. Actually, a lot of our partners who you'll meet shortly are working on multiple channels. And especially in an emergency, it's really important to give every opportunity for farmers to access information and also have repeat messaging, which is super important, whether it's TV plus SMS plus in-person training. All of that will have an impact on behavior change and information that farmers will need in these sorts of crises moving forward. So I would just like to introduce you to our four panelists, and Katie and Louis, you're welcome to join us as well. If you could all turn your cameras on. We've got the CEO of Producers Direct, Claire Rhodes, Temeskin Gebeyehu from ATA, the Director of ICT and Communications. We have Patricia Kuchinga, the Head of Productions from Medii, and we have Guy Monji from Vmware Nigeria, Country Director of Vmware Nigeria. Welcome to the discussion. Just so everyone knows, I've asked our partners to introduce themselves and then present for about 3 minutes about how they responded during the COVID-19 and/or Locust emergencies, and how they view digital channels moving forward to provide early warning and emergency solutions in future crises. So starting with Claire from Producers Direct.
Thanks so much, John. And it's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much to the Mercy Corps AgriFin team, but also the Cisco Foundation team as well. It's been a real pleasure and honor working with you this year. I'm also delighted to just recognise that Producers Direct were your winners this year for the Innovating for Impact Awards. So that was fantastic. So I'm Claire. I'm the CEO and founder of Producers Direct. Producers Direct offers a unique model. We're led by farmers for farmers, and work with an international network of over 1 million smallholders across East Africa and Latin America. So central to our work is farmer-led design and leadership. We support smallholders to transform their farms into sustainable enterprises through a range of farmer-designed and led services, both digitally and in person. And one of our strengths is working closely with farmers and youth leaders to rapidly design, test, and roll out interventions. So we were part of the campaign around the SMS and in-person response that Louis was just talking about. So in our COVID response, we partnered with IDEO.org and WeFarm to firstly undertake rapid farmer-led research to understand the key challenges farmers are facing on COVID, as well as the misinformation we've been talking about. So for example, farmers were asking us questions such as, will my cow catch COVID and die? Or should I be washing my food with bleach? And so learning from these insights from farmers and taking these results, we then worked with farmer and youth design groups to iteratively test and design a digital COVID information campaign. And as we've been talking about, we took a multimedia approach. So we developed content, including visually engaging posters that I'll share a bit more about in a minute, and messaging through SMS, WhatsApp, and radio, all disseminated and adapted into multiple local languages. And so our messaging focused on supporting farmers to farm smart, keep their communities safe, bust some of the myths and misinformation that were occurring, and activate new behaviours, particularly hand washing. And this multimedia approach was really critical to maximising the reach and impact of the campaign across diverse smallholder communities, where there was a high level of variability on literacy levels, technology access, particularly for female farmers within the community. And so to date, our multimedia campaign has been shared with over 4 million farmers internationally across Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania particularly. And we're really delighted with the results so far. So as Louis was talking about, we're seeing a 92% of farmers saying their information that they received was really helpful, with 89% reporting a change in their behaviour in relation to hand washing and not shaking hands, which is obviously crucial. And so we're now really excited to be continuing our partnership with Mercy Co AgriFin with the support of the Starbucks Foundation as well to further amplify the campaign. So to Louis' point, what's next? This is still an ongoing challenge. Looking ahead on the role of digital tools to drive future emergency responses, we really see massive potential for smallholders, but I wanted to close by sharing 3 key lessons learned we've seen over the last decade on digital tool development. Firstly, farmer-led design is critical. We need to design from the current realities that smallholders are facing. For example, as we've just been talking about, despite all the high investment that's going into smartphone-based ag tech at the moment, from the research that we were doing, 99% of farmers who were engaged in our COVID response preferred and trusted SMS. So that's a really key theme coming out really strongly today. And secondly, on emergency responses and early warning systems, they're only going to be accurate and efficient if actually paired with ground truthing data and feedback mechanisms from smallholders themselves. And thirdly, we really believe in bundled support services. And we've seen that with the combination of digital and in-person and the results that we've delivered in this campaign. And bundled support services being critical to ensure that smallholders actually can take action on the basis of the early warning information they're actually receiving. So in summary, we're really looking forward to continuing the partnership with you all to maximise the impact of digital tools, but crucially placing leadership and ownership of these digital tools and data firmly in the hands of smallholder farmers. Thanks so much. And I'll just finish by sharing a couple of examples from our campaign materials. So hopefully everyone can see the slides. These are just some of the examples of the graphics we shared. But all of the materials are open source in multiple languages and freely downloadable. So if you visit the producersdirect.org website, COVID resources, you can see more there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire. Really great work. Temesgen from ATA, you played a critical role in Ethiopia's response, and you are a government agency, so you have a different perspective, but I would love to hear your thoughts and how you responded.
Thank you very much, John, and I would like to thank Mercy Co AgriFin for recognizing us in 2 categories. So thank you very much. I'm Temesgen Gabayo from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I'm working in Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency, or ATA, as a digital agriculture. ATA is a government initiative established in 2010 for supporting the government, non-government, private sectors structures to address systematic bottlenecks for improving the livelihood of smallholder farmers and ensures the food security. So in order to support this mission, digital agriculture is established in ETA for identifying and implementing the digital tools for supporting this the organization mission. So in related to responding to the desert locust and COVID-19 pandemic, we use actually three things, just mainly three things. One is using our 8028 farmers hotline, which is actually arguably the largest exchange service in Africa. Maybe since Vmware is here, he can say something. Maybe it's the largest exchange service, IVR SMS service, which has like 5.5 million users. So the first thing we did is since there are some modules which are not working, restoring those modules and using for emergency purposes, one of our tasks we implemented. So with that, before August, our outgoing call was not working, so we couldn't push and we couldn't do surveys and we couldn't run like help desk, which these are the modules we have in our system. So by maintaining this, we started conducting a surveillance survey for knowing or for identifying the occurrence of desert locust. Before that, actually, we ran SMS survey. With that, about 46,000 survey was conducted. And then we ran IVR surveys, about 400,000 surveys was conducted. I mean, users was sent out for doing this survey. So with the information we get and with the predicted movement of the locust, we sent out about 1.5 million message or 1.5 million to 150 million users for warning about the movement of desert locust and the information how to control or to halt the movement of the desert locust. So this is one. In related to COVID response, we together collaborating with Mercy Corps, Agrifin, and others like Kabi, we incorporated COVID-19 content in our system, which has like safe family content on safe family, safe farming, safe community interaction, and others, just to inform citizens about to create awareness on COVID-19 response. Additionally, we also collaborated with Mercy Corps, Agrifin, and others to implement WhatsApp for business app. With that, we have been getting the report about the occurrence of desert locust together with our 8028 and other like eLocust 3M data we used for warning, for identifying and warning smallholder farmers about the occurrence of desert locust. In addition to this, we have been also collaborating with our partners to run a media campaign in our local radio and television to create awareness about, especially about desert locust. And with us, I think I registered a huge success, especially since we have like 5.5 million users. That helped us to address so many people, so many smallholder farmers on ground, and halt the movement of the desert locust by using different mechanisms. So this is how we handled or we used our digital tools for response. The other one is using I mean, what we think to do in the future is strengthening our collaboration with you, with all of you, and adding tools, and especially making our IVR more smart, because we can. I mean, we have 5 local languages which can be spoken by about 80% of Ethiopians, which means about 80 million people. So strengthening and making it more localized and contextualized, and even using these things for other diseases, and by collaborating with others and adding other tools, making very, very relevant and crucial information to halt or to address the COVID response and other emergencies or other like diseases such as desert crop wheat rust, and especially this, if it comes, the desert locust. Thank you very much. I will answer if there is any question.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Temesgen. Very good answer. I think you've answered to some extent Mary Pat McVeigh's question on the public chat. Every context is different. IVR solutions work better in other contexts than some. SMS is inclusive in some cases, but not all. So I think the combination of different digital communication channels is really the key, and finding that magic mix in each context is really critical. So without delaying us any further, if we can try and stick to about 3 minutes, because I'd like to leave some time for wrap up. Patricia at Media, you've done a lot on all kinds of channels and are real experts in this space. So over to you.
Thank you, John. And it's wonderful to be in this forum and discuss this, as we've done a lot of work on it. So I'm Patricia with the Media Company, and basically what we do is we support development and education through the use of media. So we produce a lot of TV programs, radio, print, and also mobile. And then backing all this up, we have something called iShamba, which is our mobile backup center. Currently, we have about 450,000 farmers that we are serving. And these farmers, we know where they are, what they want. So when this pandemic hit, it was crucial that they started communicating with us. So we did a number of things around the Locust and COVID inventions around that time. So I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see what we did. So we did a number of interventions when it came to the Locust. So the first thing we did is we created a Locust map. So working with Penn State, FAO, and Massicops, we decided to show, the viewers, our 8 million viewers, where the locusts were and what to do, because we were getting people telling us, well, they're locusts, but nobody knew what to do. So we created a map to show, the pattern that the locusts were traveling, and we were able to show the audience ways of how to identify the locusts, how to control, so the do's and the don'ts, and then what to do, the call of action. So a lot of people traditionally would eat the locusts, but because some of them had been sprayed, we had to tell them, you can't eat them, these were going to be poisonous. So that was one of the things we did. We also then set up a Shamba Shape Up WhatsApp hotline, working with Tanayo and Plant Village, where people would then just, put in a message, and they would be prompted and be given more information about the locusts, how to identify, what to do when you see one, who to call. And that was also, WhatsApp has not been very popular, but it was something that people are now beginning to use. Some of the key outcomes that we found when we were doing this is that we were able to reach, our 8 million viewers with this message weekly. So that was between the growing season. We also were able to send 17,000 messages to people in our platform, just telling them about the locust. And these were prompted by them asking us. So that was quite good. We were also able to register 1,000 new users onto the iShamba platform on those marginalized areas. And because they were receiving this timely based information, it was useful to them to know what to do. Around COVID, what we did is that we found that a lot of our farmers were asking us questions on, what to do around COVID. So first it was like, again, can my pigs get COVID? Such questions. And then that gradually changed to, should I let my workers come and farm in my farm because of COVID? So what we did is we developed something called a Q&A. And here we addressed some of the concerns from the audience, that the questions we were getting. And it started first by demystifying what COVID was and how you can catch it, to then later farmers now asking us, I can't get a market because of the restrictions. So some of the things that we found was that we were able to send out to register 20,000 new farmers around this COVID time, because people wanted more information, and SMS and TV was a good combination. We were also able to send 6.7 million SMSs to farmers on ways to cope. We also carried out a lot of research, working with Busara, working with Vmware, and also working with the 60 decibels. So those were some of the things that we were doing around these strategies. One of the things that we also found that really worked well is the combination when people are at home watching television, and then they would get a message, they would be able to SMS and get that message back quite quickly. I think that was a strong thing. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. I think overall I can say, as we go forward, the combination of using digital tools where you're using TV and SMS or mobile, that is usually very successful and a cheap way in terms of technology because you can reach a lot of people. We've also seen that owners of digital tools can forge partnership and alliances because we were all able as a team to come and work together, be it whether it was to research what the farmers were doing around that time or just get more information from them. I think a combination of these collaborations and partnerships were quite strong when it came to working on both the Locust and COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Well done in a short space of time. What I love about your work is you're aligning messages between TV and the digital world, and what is probably a more old-fashioned form of educating, informing people with more modern communication techniques. And you're giving farmers a feedback loop, so it's not just a one-way message, but there is a conversation happening with farmers who have questions that need answering. Last but not least, Guy from Vmware, Nigeria. We have maybe 3 or 4 minutes for you, but would love to hear your context, obviously very different from Kenya and Ethiopia.
Yes, hello everyone. So for those of you, my name is Guy. I'm the country director for Vmware in Nigeria. For those of you who do not know what Vmware does, basically Vmware stands for Via Mobile. So we leverage mobile technology to capture and disseminate information, mostly leveraging SMS and IVR. IVR is like a interactive voice response, so it's really automated smart robot phone calls. And we use such tools as phone survey, outbound SMS, outbound calls, hotline, and so forth. So we did support the Mercy Corp AgriFin Digital Farmer, whereby we trained 3,000 extension agents, and that was programmed before the COVID. What we found, and this worked pretty well, what we found after COVID is that there was a need, and there is still a need for tools for remote training, whether they be web-based, SMS-based, smart app, or IVR. So we're doing a lot of that. During the COVID-19 crisis, we supported further Mercy Corps with a project called Gaskia, where we looked at debunking false rumors for COVID-19 in the northeast of Nigeria. So there we use different tools. We use Infoline. We use also lots of SMS to reach out to truth champions. So the truth champions are really champions in the community that are in touch with the community that can hear the false rumors. They call the hotline, they report the rumors, they leave messages, and then we have a system that can track those messages. You can easily listen to the recording and then add comments. So it's like almost like an IT update where someone called for a problem and you can create a ticket. So we did that, and we call back the truth champion and speak to them, and then they can go back to the community and explain and debunk those false rumors. And also the intelligence is good to really understand how to design further intervention and what kind of content and messaging to use. We also supported Mercy Corp and Cisco with safe farming for, I think it was 50,000 farmers. Here we use our 321 info line. So it's really good for sustainability because it's like you can make free phone calls if you have an Airtel SIM, because it's a PPP between Vmware representing the public sector and Airtel representing the private sector. So there we really mixed information for farming and agronomy tips with COVID-19 messaging, prevention, symptoms, and myth, which was also really helpful. Some lessons learned, really for us, I've heard a lot about is SMS better than IVR? What we found in Nigeria, the literacy rate is 60%. So if we only use SMS, we leave 40% of the population out right from the onset. So as John was saying, and I want to reinforce it, using a mixture of omni-channel communication, face-to-face, SMS, IVR, WhatsApp. All that sounds very good to us. And as John pointed out, finding the right mix. So for us, it's really about, also what we found is that, so IVR for us has worked really well in Nigeria. Other things that we found is a lot of the times we don't prepare well for the project. So as we keep working more and more, we really try to prepare our partners for their intervention. And that is, are we targeting the right people? Do we have the right messaging? And more importantly, with the technology that we are using, can people access it? And do they know how to use it? So for instance, we've seen in Nigeria sometimes that you want to use a WhatsApp bot, but people won't buy the data because they can't afford it. So then SMS, USSD, and IVR is more accessible and cheaper, so it works better. So it's really important for us. And then with IVR, it's like people can access it, yes, because 90% of the people have at least a simple phone, and IVR work with the most simple phone. But do they know how to use it? And do they know who's calling them? Do they understand why we're calling them? So we've noticed that a big key is sensitization. And as we sensitize people and prepare them for the intervention, usually the conversion rate and the effectiveness is a lot higher. So I'll pause here, and if there's question, I would love to answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Gia. And I think you've really highlighted a lot of the important lessons learned from Nigeria. What we know from the digital universe is that every country is different, but certainly embedding yourselves within a telecommunications company to support them on public health and farming related matters is a very good route to sustainable scale. And we've seen it work in other countries as well. So hats off to you and the work you do in Nigeria. So we have 3 minutes left, which really isn't enough time to go into a public Q&A, unfortunately. I would have loved to have got to some of your questions. I think what we've seen today is an array of really innovative digital solutions to emergency response. But digital is not the be all and end all. Farmers still need cash, they still need markets, etc. But there are some really interesting lessons learned from this group. Most of these resources will be on our website. All of the partners you can see here are contactable through the marketplace on the platform for AgriFin. And if you wish to reach out to them directly about their work, please do so. Just a final plug for our next upcoming session. It's our closing plenary event all about climate change with our program director, Lisa, and a great panel with many conversations that will hopefully summarize the last 4 days for everyone. So please do stick around for that. It's on the it's in the agenda if you wish to go there. And so finally, I just want to say thank you to all of our partners, to 60 Decibels and Busara for some excellent research presentations. And then of course, the key partners in our COVID-19 response and Desert Locust response, Media Producers Direct, ATA and Vmware. Thank you, and I hope to see you during the plenary event.